Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland, with me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast. I'm Kelly, and if you are watching via video, you've probably noticed we have a very special guest in the house today. We've got Romy McAuley, who is my go-to girl when it comes to wedding ceremonies and getting legally married in Ireland. So Romy, it is so good to have you with us. Hello.
Hey, hello.
Thank you.
Lovely to be here.
Thanks for joining us. If you're listening to the podcast and it's not your first time, you might recognize Romy. She's joined us a few times before. We started with an episode way back in, I think it was episode 9. 9 and 10.
Time ago.
Yeah, it was a very long time ago. That was almost 140 episodes ago. And we spoke all about getting legally married in Ireland. And since then, Romy has joined the podcast and shared expertise on different things. But Romy, before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You know, where do you tend to find yourself across the country? So if anyone's listening from different parts of the country and they're interested in speaking to you, just tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, like I said, Romy McAuley is my name. I have been doing this lovely job for 16 years now. I've been doing ceremonies, have been involved with weddings for a lot longer than that. In my past life, I was a wedding coordinator. So lots and lots of years of looking after weddings and couples for their weddings, but ceremonies for 16 years. I'm based just outside of Dublin. I'm in sort of the Meath-Kildare border. I travel all over the country, wherever I'm wanted and loved. I always say I will turn up for weddings wherever I'm needed, which luckily I'm very spoiled and I've gone to some beautiful places. Well, there's so many beautiful places all over the country. So yes, so I'll go wherever you want me to be. I will be there and happily marry whomever, wherever, however. I'm open for everything. So I love it. It's the best part of the day. It's part.
No, that's great. Something that I love when I speak to you is you're clearly really passionate about weddings and you know a lot. And so that's one of the reasons that I tend to gravitate towards you when I've got questions, because you just know so much. And, whenever I'm thinking about wedding ceremonies in Ireland, whether they are the legal ceremony or the symbolic ceremony or anything like that, I always think of you and I think, what would Romy do? How would she do this? And so actually, as I started piecing together this episode, I thought, what better way to build a wedding ceremony timeline than by speaking to you and getting some expertise? Because I had so many questions that I'm sure the listeners have probably had themselves. So I think something would be great to do today is to really look at all the elements of a wedding ceremony and to work out together, like, how can a couple piece together the things that they would love to have in their ceremony? And something that you mentioned to me before we started recording this episode was that, there's so many different types of ceremonies and there's so many different ways things can go, which is probably one of the most beautiful things about wedding ceremonies in Ireland, is that there really are so many options.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure we'll have lots of different things we can talk about. But why don't we get started by looking at the legal side of things? So if somebody is having their wedding ceremony and getting legally married at that event and, they haven't done the legal bit before, but everything's happening on the day, is there anything that they have to include in their wedding ceremony in order for it to be a legal ceremony?
There's 2 absolute requirements that must be included in the ceremony. And a lot of people, I think, are quite surprised with this, that the two things that are there, the 2 elements that are there are not what you would normally expect. Well, they kind of are, but they aren't. The declarations of intent to marry. When you go into the HSE office to organise your paperwork with the notification of intent to marry, so the green folder, which we all talk about all the time. So when you go into the HSE and are getting the green folder, you sit in front of the registrar and you say 2 declarations in front of the registrar. One is that there is no impediment to your marriage, and the other is that you want to marry each other. And once you've made those 2 declarations, you sign a little piece of paper, which is called a marriage registration form, and they then give that to you in the lovely green folder. On the day of the actual wedding ceremony, so the legal marriage ceremony, those two declarations must be again stated, and they must be stated in the presence and within the hearing of your two legal witnesses and the solemniser on the day. So normally, obviously, everybody can hear what's happening in the ceremony, so from a audible's perspective, that's all fine.
Yeah.
But those three other people must be within earshot of the couple saying their declarations. So they're the two main things that need to be said during the wedding ceremony. And the other element that must be done is actually signing the paperwork itself. So you re-sign the actual document, the marriage registration form. So those two things, the two declarations, so the declaration of no impediment to marriage and that you want to marry each other, and then the actual signing of the document are the two items that must be included on the day with those 5 people present. So, obviously you can have another 300 odd people there with you, or it can just be those 5. So the couple themselves, their 2 legal witnesses, and the solemniser overseeing the actual ceremony. But apart from those 2 things, so apart from the declarations and the actual signing, included in the ceremony can be absolutely anything that you want. Obviously, depending on, what type of ceremony that you're having.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think, you have to say wedding vows and you have to put rings on and you have to have this and you have to have that. And, well, actually, you don't.
Okay.
As long as you have those 2 declarations, as long as you're signing the paperwork with your witnesses and your solemniser, anything else is an optional extra. So a lot of people, aren't really sure of what they have to have and what is sort of the minimum requirement. So it comes down to the couple, obviously, of what the couple want. And as we said, of what type of ceremony that you're having, because there's maybe some requirement depending on where you are, who's overseeing the ceremony as well, of what they need to have in the ceremony from their perspective. So, but those are the 2 main things: declarations and the actual signing itself.
That's so interesting, because I definitely came into this conversation having a longer list in my head of what I thought you were going to say. And so I think that's super interesting. And I'm sure, like you mentioned, if somebody, was getting married in a different scenario, a different context, and, perhaps it was a different religion, there may be specific requirements from the location they get married in, if it's a church or another religious location. But I suppose in terms of the legal side of things, it's really good to know what needs to be included. And actually, for that to be quite a small list is quite helpful, because then it does really open the door to everything else you might want to include.
It really does. It really does. I speak to a lot of couples who either at the beginning of the planning process, they either want to include just absolutely everything that they've seen and heard about, and, I love everything, I want to have absolutely everything. But then when they get down to actually looking at the different elements and the things that they ultimately decide to put into the ceremony, that could be a lot shorter. And then on the flip side, I have a lot of couples which might come to me and say, do you know what, we're really shy, we don't want to say a lot of things in front of everybody else, we're really quite private, we just want to keep things actually really quite small and subtle. And so to actually have the scope of being able to give as much as you want, or to bring it right back down to something that is really very small, is actually really lovely. And that's purely why I do this, is it's giving people the choice and giving people the option and the flexibility, and that they're not feeling pressured to have to do everything. And we see it on the HIGM all the time of it's your day, do what you want, there's no rules. And this is a really big prime example of that. There aren't any rules. You can do what you want and you can make it your own. So it's a big thing. And it's great. Yes.
I love that. I really do. And I think this is a good segue into, really building a wedding ceremony timeline. And so from your perspective as an expert, as somebody who's probably been at hundreds and hundreds of weddings and seen all kinds of different ways of doing things, what would you recommend when people think about the order of the events, like starting from the very beginning, like maybe even before anybody walks down the aisle, what would you recommend people think through when it comes to the order? And then how would you determine that order? Would different things be determined by personal preference, or is it really the flow of how the event could go? Why don't you just walk us through what you think? And I might interject here and then ask a few more questions, but I'd love to hear from you how you would advise couples to piece together different elements of their ceremony.
Definitely. Well, I mean, even taking a little tiny step back further than that, obviously when a couple decides on what type of wedding ceremony that they're wanting to have for the day, and that's obviously going to start them down a particular little track. When you're looking at as the type of ceremony which I do, which are obviously non-church ceremonies, so in a venue or at a location and things like that, when you are talking to the person who is looking after you for the ceremony, so be it if it's a celebrant or a solemniser or a registrar or whatever, start to talk to them about, well, what am I allowed to include? Is there anything I'm not allowed to include? Because obviously certain people, certain organisations do and don't allow certain things. So from a starting point, you need to find out sort of where your boundaries might be.
Yeah.
Again, when I'm talking about my ceremonies, because I am so flexible with what I do, it's sort of free reign. You can do whatever you're wanting. So when I sit down with a couple and we sort of start the planning process, I give them a lot of information, a lot of resource for them to go through, to have a look at. So they don't need to go hunting for things. But I give them a lot of choices, and it's the key parts of the ceremony which I would show them and say, look, here's all of the different types of rituals that you might want to have a look at. And from a ritual perspective, I always say a ritual is something that you can do during the ceremony. It's more of a doing element. So it could be lighting a candle or having a remembrance or doing a sand ceremony or hand fasting, or I know you mentioned in an email that we were talking about when we were organising the chat, washing feet, doing different Chinese tea ceremonies, sake, Japanese sake ceremony, whatever it might be. So the rituals are more of a physical doing sort of element. And then you have more of the talking side of things. So readings, what you might be saying for your vows, when you're putting rings onto each other's hands. So the key elements for a couple are to look at those little parts of the ceremony and to think about, well, what's going to be something that's reflective of us, of our relationship, of what we like, obviously, the type of vibe that we want to have during the ceremony. Do we want something that's really quite chilled and relaxed, or do we want to maybe be a little bit more formal and structured and have a little bit more of that sort of seriousness and formality in the ceremony?
Yeah.
And find the things that are just right for you. And I mean, it's a big thing that I always talk about with couples is, look, this is your day. This is your moment. So find the things that you really love, and don't necessarily think about a colour theme and it's all about Disney or something like that. Yes, that can be a part of it. It's a very small part, but just think about the things that you love, because when you find all those things that really represent you, that you really like, when you put them all together, they are going to all blend and be just absolutely perfect. And people are going to walk away from that part of the day and say, oh my gosh, that was so them. That was so them. Everything about it, the music, the readings, what the celebrant was talking about, like it was just so them. And I mean, that for me is a brilliant day when I walk away from the office and it's like, so nice to get that sort of feedback. So find the things that just you love, if it's funny readings, if it's serious readings, if it's really beautiful personal handwritten vows that you've done yourselves, or if it's something that you've found online, the rituals, if it's something to include the kids, or just something about the two of you and just be like, this is just us. Find those things. Your celebrant, if you've got a celebrant or a solemniser, they should be giving you examples of a lot of these things. They should be helping you to point you in the right direction to go and find things to include in your ceremony. As I said, I have a resource that I give to all of my couples, and so they have everything there that they can just go and dive in whenever they want to do their planning and just dive into it and say, yep, let's sit down on a Friday night with a pizza and a bottle of wine and stuck in and do the ceremony. And I mean, that's what you want. You want people that are really chilled and relaxed, finding things that they really love and getting the stuff that is right for them. Because when you then bring it back to me and say, here, Romy, this is everything that we have. This is what we found. This is what we love. And they're throwing it back in my direction. I can then build their ceremony around all of these things that they have chosen and put it in a really nice sort of symbiont order and get some music in for them and, you know, show them where the music is going to work for them, and then send them back a nice order of ceremony that they can say, look, here's everything. Here's everything that you've chosen. Here's the order that it works in really well. Here's where you should put some music in. So go back to your musicians or get a playlist together or whatever that might be and feed the music into that. And then we start to really build that ceremony around everything that they have. And it's a really nice, it's a nice joint venture of getting all of those things that a couple want. They have no idea how to write a ceremony and they don't need to. It's just about finding these key elements and then sending it back to the people that will put it all together for you and say, yeah, I can do that. We can get all of that together and going through it. So finding the stuff is the fun, easy part. That's the fun part. And it should be fun. I mean, everything about planning a wedding should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be enjoyable.
I agree. Like, I know people can get a little bit stressed, and I completely understand why, because there's lots to think about, particularly with ceremonies and getting legally married. But you're right. It should be fun. And I love the example that you gave of, you know, sitting back with a pizza and a bottle of wine and just looking through the elements together and making that decision in a relaxed and happy setting. And so I really like the just the kind of method that you have where you say these are all the options that you could have in your ceremony. And then the couple can go and think about what they want. They come back to you and then you say, okay, well, this is what I recommend for the order. So when you're coming up with that order, what are you thinking through in your mind? I'm sure you probably have, you know, years and years of expertise, things that just come to you and you just go, that makes sense. And so I appreciate that it's probably like, you know, going into the depths of your mind, trying to work out why you think this.
Sort of like I always say to my couples, look, when you're finding stuff, don't try and put it in an order, because believe me, it's just easier to dump everything onto an email or onto a Word document and just send it to me, because as soon as I see it on a page, I will know exactly you know, where things are going to fit and everything. That just comes down to experience. And as I said, I mean, a couple doesn't need to know that. You know, if you have a professional with you and a celebrant or a solemniser with you that's working with you, they will know that part. So it is definitely just about finding the things that you love. A good celebrant will always come back to you and talk you through things and go through, well, from a length of the ceremony. And I know for myself, it's something that we talk about very early on in the planning, so the couple have a good idea of sort of what the average sort of norm sweet spot is for a length of a ceremony, but also when they're looking at things to include, not to think about a timing perspective. Like, don't overthink that part, because when you come back and start to put everything together, a good celebrant will look at everything and say, well, look, I can give you a good guesstimate of what a timing is going to be, and now let's sort of revisit things. And if it is going to be a little bit too long or whatever, we can then start to play around with what you've chosen, and if there's things that might be a little bit more flexible. But from a basic sort of, I mean, I suppose there is kind of it's actually something I used to sort of say, sorry, I'm all over the place. It's something I used to say very early on in when I started doing ceremonies. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
True.
And it's such a good philosophy to always work by, because, you know, wedding ceremonies are the same, not individual ones of exactly what's going on, but from the point of view of you do have kind of almost like a standard sort of format. There's always going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's story.
Yeah.
It has to happen. So how things sort of fit into those three sort of sections comes down to ultimately what's picked from the element side of things and where those things are going to slot in. But you're always going to have, a nice introduction, nice welcome, some opening words to thank and welcome everybody for being there with you, sharing your day with you. You're going to have something that's talking about what marriage is all about, what you're getting yourselves into, what you're signing up for. So talking about the love and the marriage and the relationship, you as a couple and talking about all of those lovely things about what weddings and marriages and love is all about. And then you have what I always say, the ceremonies are split into three thirds. So the first third is all of that. Welcome, the thanks for being here, the acknowledgement of people, or be it if it's people that are with you or obviously who aren't with you as well.
Yeah.
Talking about the marriage, the love, the relationship, what this part of the day is all about. The centre third of the ceremony is the formality. So that's where we have to do the declarations. It's where we have that more formal part of the ceremony. If you're doing vows, if you're having ring exchange, those key elements are right in the middle of the ceremony because it's kind of the climactic part of what the ceremony is about. And then the final third is just sort of working towards an end. So you're wrapping things up. Be it if you've had some rituals, we might need to finish off a ritual, if it was a candle lighting or sand ceremony, wine box, all of those sorts of things. Doing the signing, obviously, and the big ending, which is the pronouncement and the kiss each other bit, and then to get out and go and have a party and go and enjoy this day and celebrate. So if you break that ceremony down into the three parts, it's a really easy way of sort of going, okay, well, this is sort of the first section, this is the middle section, and this is the ending. And even from a couple's perspective, they can look at that as well and sort of go, right, well, we have something that's in all of these three parts. And so we know that when we're going back to our celebrant, look, we think that we've sort of covered everything that we're wanting to have in the ceremony. So that's a really nice, easy way of looking at that sort of schedule side and the format side of the ceremony itself.
That's really helpful because I think when people initially think of their ceremony and they're considering other wedding ceremonies that they've been to or things that they might have seen on TV in the movies, there can be so many different elements that it feels almost like this insurmountable task of keeping it all together. But actually to break it down into the three thirds and to think through what each of those thirds would entail and what you could include in each of them, I think that's a really simplified way of looking at each part of the ceremony. And so, you mentioned the ending and, I've seen so many different things and you've probably seen even more things. And so from your perspective, what do you tend to recommend? I've seen people signing the registry with the guests present and then they walk down the aisle and then the guests follow. I've seen the guests leaving and forming the tunnel, the receiving line, while the couple and witnesses sign the registry. And I'm sure there's so many other iterations of those things. But how would you guide a couple as to the best practices for really concluding the ceremony in a way that's special and, doesn't feel anticlimactic, but feels like a really beautiful way to end an amazing ceremony?
I always think that more traditional way of having that pronounced. So if you've done the signing, for myself, I always have the signing as kind of the second last thing that happens in the ceremony, and then there's the pronouncement and the kiss and the recessional, to walk it back down the aisle, and that's kind of pretty much mostly how the end of my ceremonies would go. Obviously, it depends. Some couples, and I was actually only talking to a couple yesterday, and they're doing the Jewish tradition of breaking the glass at the end of the ceremony, or it could be jumping the broom or something like that. And so there could be a couple of little different things that couples do choose to actually have at the very end. But I always think, when you have a lovely group of people with you, and even even during COVID, this was the case, when it was only like 2 or 3 people that was in a room. I just think that having that lovely thing of having the pronouncement, having a lovely, beautiful kiss and a bit of a moment with the two of you right at the very end, get the music started and then have that beautiful walk back down the aisle. The bride I was talking to yesterday, she was saying, we're a little bit unsure of sort of what we're doing because she's entering from a different way that what they're exiting. So there was a little bit of logistics of, okay, well, you're coming in this way, but are you going out that way? And so we had a big chat about sort of the entrance and the exit. But I said, to have that exit, you've got 100 odd people that are going to be there with you. Have that walk back down the aisle. Stop halfway down. Have a big smooch halfway down the aisle. Have everybody throwing the confetti on. Oh, it's such a good photo. So if any couples are thinking about, oh my gosh, what are we doing for the music and the walking out? Stop halfway down the aisle. Talk to your photographer about it and stop halfway down the aisle and have a big second kiss at that moment. It's such a great photo because you have everybody standing and having a big cheer and everything, and it's just it's a great one. And then everyone's clapping and enjoying the music as you're walking out. So I love that. I think it's a really nice way. Doing it the other way, like you were saying, I know a lot of Catholic ceremonies, they might have the couple going off into like a little antechamber and doing the signing before they then come back and walk out. And at that stage, what a lot of people do is, like you said, they stand, the guests would leave and they'd line up outside the church and have the receiving line there. It's kind of the same, but the couple would then be sort of walking out of the church with nobody actually in the church. So I think from a couple's perspective, that could be a little bit anticlimactic of just that little part of the exit. But obviously when you get to the door and then you're walking out, then everybody's outside and everything. So that you still have that. It's just it's just moved.
True, yeah, it's just
one area to the other. But I think having some sort of exit, I think it's always really nice because there's a big cheer, and as soon as you're kissing, everyone's cheering and yelling and screaming and stuff and everything. And I mean, it's just, you're on a buzz by then. You're just on cloud 9 and floating back down the aisle. So it's lovely. It's really
I suppose
good.
by then any nerves that anybody would have, they're gone. People just
your shoulders are down, you're nice and chilled and relaxed, and you're ready to move on to the next part of the day. So
and you can see that in the photos as well, like just the difference. If somebody's felt a little bit nervous compared to just how relaxed and kind of stress-free everything is at that point. So before we end, I thought it would be really good to hear from you if you have any top tips for couples who are planning their wedding and they're thinking about the ceremony, like anything that you think they should keep in mind.
Absolutely. Do you know, it was something that I know we kind of talked about it beforehand, but I didn't sort of mention what I was thinking about. I was thinking about this morning, and it was actually something that's popped up on the group, on the Facebook group, quite a bit more recently. And people have been talking about contacting their suppliers and when and how and, at what stage do people contact suppliers. I did a vlog a little while ago, which is on my website, and it kind of talks about it. But I always say to any of my couples, please don't be worried about coming to me at any time and asking me questions. That's what I'm here for. And that's what all of your suppliers are here for. They are here for you. So whenever you have a question, it doesn't matter if it's one little question on a very large empty email or if it's a lot of questions on a very large email. We would prefer to hear from you and find the questions and get the answers for you than you stewing over something for days or weeks or months. Sure. So whenever you need to contact a supplier, be it if it's your celebrant to get the ceremony done and organised, or if it's a makeup artist or a musician or a florist or whatever, get in touch with us and ask us. Send us an email, send us a WhatsApp, give us a ring, not at 3:00 on a Friday. think about when your supplier is working. That was actually one thing I was thinking about this morning. It's like, you bring a makeup artist between 9 and 12 on a Saturday morning. Chances are,
they're going to be busy.
Don't ring your celebrant between 12 and 3 on a Friday or Saturday. Chances are they probably won't answer the phone to you. But leave them a message, definitely, and send them an email. So, I'd say my biggest tip for any couple is just get in touch with your supplier. Ask them what it is. What do you need from me? Where am I at with the planning side of things? At what stage do you want to have this stuff back to you so I know that we've got everything back in time? And your suppliers will absolutely come back to you and say, thank you so much. Yep, this is what I need. This is a little list of things, so and then you can go away and you can work on those and get everything together and then throw it back at your supplier again and say, that's done, and tick it off the list. So biggest tip is always don't be scared about getting in touch with your supplier. We are here. We want to help you. All we want is the best for your day. So please ask us if you need anything. So
that's really good. I think that is such a helpful reminder to couples that, they might be thinking each of their suppliers is dealing with several other couples at the same time, but it is such a good reminder that each supplier genuinely wants the best for each couple that they work with. And it's not a nuisance to receive questions. All the suppliers are invested in making the wedding amazing. So that's great.
Definitely. I would prefer to hear from a couple a year in advance with a funny little question, which I've probably heard, 150 times. But I would prefer to hear that question and have a little bit of contact, little dribbles of contact throughout the planning process than hear nothing from a couple. I would prefer to be have couples coming to me whenever they want to, because it's comforting for us as well to know that couples are doing what they need to do from their side as well. So, specifically from the ceremony side, don't leave your notification of intent to marry 2 or 3 months before. Do it before 3 months.
Yeah. Do things
6 to 12 months beforehand. Get in touch with the HSC. Don't leave it to 3 months beforehand.
Yeah. That's really good. Well, Romy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelly.
It's just always so good to chat with you, to hear your expert tips, and just for you to help unpack different things that couples probably have stewing in their minds. And so thank you so much for joining us. And to those listening, thanks so much for listening. If you want to have a look at a written version of this episode, just head to weddingsonline.ie, and every episode has a written transcript, and you can keep up to date. You can find out more about Romy and how to get in touch with her as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kelly.